All right, we're live. Um, for those who are tuning in, whether on Facebook or YouTube, it's me, Jeremy L. Williams, with my good friend, Pastor Dr. Lynn Hargrove. We invite you to like, subscribe, join in on whichever platform you are. There's a live session because we kind of want to hear what people have to say. Um, Dr. Lynn, you want to greet the people?
Absolutely. Good evening, everybody. Happy pre general conference or general conference eve, how we want to call it. I am excited about this conversation. We are getting ready for Dallas, about to leave, checked into the flight. We're ready to go. We're ready to go.
And people
Um,
like me, loading up, getting ready to drive across the Metroplex, wherever you're driving in from, as we're getting ready to do the work, the CME Church. Um,
yeah.
I want to thank everybody who's been watching our videos up to now, who as we've been talking through a charge to keep, where part of what we are focusing on with a charge to keep is recognizing that local churches are a charge, but our work as delegates is because we have a charge to keep. Um, and so we want to invite you as we're going through to, if you have some questions or some concerns, some things that you're thinking about for the general conference, to join in the comments. Let us hear what you have to say. We intend to be responding to those comments, and and we're here just to talk a little bit about some of the things we talked about before, like the local church as a hermeneutic or general conference as an exercise in stewardship. We talked about ecclesia as practice of democracy. We've had a lot of good conversation. We invite you to go back and look at those other videos after this live. But yeah, we're here. We're Let us know that you're here, where you're watching from, if you're tuning in. But yeah, um,
So
what you got?
So I was Dr. Williams. I was thinking just to, as we wait for folks to get in, tell me about your first general conference as a delegate.
Yeah, my first general conference as a delegate was as a young adult lay delegate. I guess, and this current one is my last general conference as a young adult, but on the clergy side. So my first was in 2010 and in Mobile. That's where I was able to cut my teeth on being a general conference delegate and seeing the different ways that the church operates at this larger connectional level. What about you?
Yeah, mine as a delegate was also 2010, and it was from Southeast Alabama, which was where my dad was serving at the time.
Well, I didn't
He,
mention North Central Alabama sent me to that first general conference. Yeah.
yeah, and I think at the time. Um, I'd been going to general conference since I was a kid because my dad has been going, and so it's just a very I think what stood out for me in 2010 was just how different uh, the engagement is as an onlooker. You sort of, as a kid, you're just asking your parent, what's Bishop Bass doing? Why is this person crying? What is what's going on? And 2010 was a very eventful general conference
Yeah.
to cut your teeth on.
A lot of bishops were retiring and
Yeah,
elected. Issues of bishops' characters were hot topics. Um,
people
yeah,
were told to get out the room. People were
yeah,
told to
it
get out the
was.
room.
It was. Like as millennials, it seems like that was like a lot of our political experience was just on fire, just
Yeah, yeah,
crisis, realizing that we
yeah.
were thrown into a lot of big decisions at relatively early. Um, Maybe this is true of other generations, but I know definitely as millennials, we have seen crisis after crisis, and in the church, I think that's also relevant, especially at this moment, one of the biggest things that's different, I would say, is that back then I remember getting so much campaign literature in advance, and so much excitement around both the Episcopal elections as well as just the meeting. But I feel like that's waned a good bit. And I imagine that it's a marker of some other kinds of declines that I think are going to be really important for us to think about as we go into this conference. And I want to remind people, if you're watching, let us know where you're coming in from. If you have some comments, questions about the general conference, feel free to join in. But yeah, but how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I'm getting that the campaigning has transitioned to more virtual and digital platforms and text messages and phone calls. I remember, or very vividly in 2010, being on campus. I was in college, and getting a Bible from W.E. Lockett.
Mm,
He mailed out Bibles, and he mailed out CDs with him reading the Book of John. It was
mm.
we got pencils and candy and pens and letter openers and all kinds of swag, all kinds of campaign swag came in the mail. And then when we got to Mobile, even more desks, the table was full of stuff,
Oh
candy,
yeah.
all kinds of stuff. Um, but every single day, maybe in the last month or so, I've gotten a text message from a candidate. I've gotten an email, several emails from
Yeah, that's
candidates.
true.
Yeah, like you
Oh
know,
yeah.
we've transitioned. We've transitioned.
Yeah, it's full steam ahead for the positions. And one thing that we want to think about is really the positions on one side, but as has been kind of our custom with this whole series, is we're interested in some of the potential policy decisions that can come out, and some things that we can think about, especially like strengthening local churches, and thinking about how we can use this meeting to practice democracy. Again, we encourage people who are listening to let us know if you have anything you want us to think with. But yeah, um, we've been thinking through some of these resolutions, but also some of the big questions around what this general conference represents. And in some ways, th- looking back at 2010 is a really useful marker, because it was 10 years before the pandemic and
Mhm.
12 years or three quadrennia before the general conference in the pandemic, which in that way there were some symbols of some signs of decline, but there were also ways that the church has changed drastically. That 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 unless somebody had a strong future telling prophetic gift, they could not have anticipated, right? And I think we have to talk about what it means to do this work in a post COVID, post AI, post every church can go live on Facebook kind of world. And so as we're entering into this moment, doing our conference here live, yeah, those are some things we should be thinking about. But I also think that they show how different, even just in the brief time we've been coming to general conferences, things have changed.
Yeah, one of the things that I hope that we will do differently this time, we everybody's excited about the bishops. We know that, right? That is we have a lot of energy at our general conferences around electing bishops and who's going to get elected. Who do you like and who's going in? And they left this one at the door and da 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 da. We to the extent where I remember the general conference in 2018. I remember one woman at my church who was normally a delegate did not run to be a delegate because she said, "Why do I need to be a delegate? We're not electing any bishops." And I want to be clear, not in my current church, not the church I pastor, but
Fix it up.
uh, yeah, not at the church that I pastor. Um, but at the church I was attending, and I thought, wow, that's just an anecdote, but I think it's a very telling one. It's illustrative of just how much focus and emphasis we put on bishops and electing bishops. And there's so many, and you and I were talking about this earlier. There's so much other stuff that we do. There's so many other operational things that are really, really important for us to pay attention to. And so I really, really, really hope that we will give just as much energy, if not more energy, to the resolutions that we are going to have to consider. People are sending these things in, relying on us to deliberate.
Yeah.
Right? These are things that are important to people. Things that, issues and problems that people have run into over the last 4 years that they need us to try to resolve.
And our conversations have intentionally not spent much time talking about bishops.
Yeah.
And part of it was by design. First, because at the General Conference, bishops are ex officio members per paragraph 201.1. They don't have voice or vote. So, although they do wield a great amount of influence, whatever happens at the General Conference is the delegates doing it.
Yeah.
That's why it's important that we take delegates seriously, take the role seriously, take the committee assignment seriously, take the work of reading through these things. As you mentioned, these faithful people from congregations across the denomination have submitted, because there's a way that they are expecting for us to do right by them. And that's one thing I think that has really been at the core of what we want to encourage people to think about, that certainly no one should be thinking about the General Conference as a vacation, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's a moment where we're going with an obligation to do right by people, to do right by the people that sent us, to do right by the people who have raised us in these traditions, and like as I wrote on my post today, to do right by Black folks, to remember that, like, as a denomination, one of the historical Black denominations, right? They're like it's important for us to be faithful to the work, because this really directly impacts the lives of our people. And real quick, again, feel free to, if you have some comments or you want to jump in into the chat, let us know. But yeah, go ahead. I see you wanted to say something, Rev.
Yeah. I think I appreciate that you brought to bear the the sort of history of this kind of affair. One of the things that we are really clear about in the very first General Conference in the CME Church is those delegates were weighing their own, local. They would have been slave mission or well, they would have been local charges at the time, but they were also thinking about what was going on in the country. They were also, there are multiple valences that I think we need to consider when we are in this meeting, which is why this is why it can't be a vacation. There's too much to consider, and there's a lot at stake. What's at stake? What are some of the things you think, or a thing or two that is at stake in this General Conference?
Yeah. One of the big things I think is at stake is the viability of local churches, and how we are going to indicate that local churches are really still the bread and butter of our organization. And one way I see that is how do we make sure that these local congregations that are already feeling immense amounts of pressure, seeing money sent up and not able to clearly see the return on their investment, if you will, using language from a past Episcopal address, how can we make sure that these congregations that are already struggling, how we can make sure they have more resources, and that the General Conference and the larger church is not extractive. Like that is going to be really at the fore of budget concerns and otherwise. How do we make sure that this meeting is not taking more from people who have already given so much and are given so much. Um, how do we reduce the burden? That's one of the major things that's in the front of my mind, that we need to be signaling from the general conference down, that these local congregations, they need less of a burden so that they can continue to do the work of impacting Black lives and helping to transform communities and bring people closer to the divine.
In a I first of all, I want to echo that. I want to echo that, and that is no, uh, that is that is so very clear to me as a pastor, as someone who has to. I tell people all the time, every week, I have to make decisions with my church officers about finances and budgets and how we make the best of the resources that we have to do our program. And so I am keenly sensitive to how great the need for relief is from the top. Every dollar that local churches spend uh, supporting the denomination means that's a dollar we can't we can't spend on something in the community. Now, if you're at a local church that's blessed to to do both, and you're doing all right, that's great. But I do know for a fact that there are there is a need there is a significant need in this denomination at the local church level for relief. And I'm not even just gonna say relief, Jeremy. I'm gonna say for the general conference. This is echoing something you just said. For the general conference, for the general church to support local churches, and not just one with with the grant, with with an emergency gift, but to really figure out a way to signal to as many local churches as possible, we exist as a denomination, as a connection, because you exist, and
Mhm.
we want to support. We want to figure out ways. So I'm looking for policies um, that offer relief to local churches, but I'm also looking for policies that support local churches. I think those are two
And
slightly different things. But go ahead.
and I want to just throw my Bible scholar hat in and talk
Mhm.
about how this work of thinking about what we do with resources as Jesus following communities goes all the way back to the letters to the earliest Jesus followers. We see it in Paul's letters, particularly the letter to in all of the authentic Paul letters, especially like Corinthians and Philippians. There's always this conversation about what to do with these collected funds. On some of the previous videos, I've read an example of these funds that were being collected. That part of what it has meant to follow Jesus, because of both the ancient models of associations and ecclesia and assemblies, was to think about how do you faithfully allocate and use the resources of the people who are a part of the fellowship, the koinonia, right? Gets translated as fellowship or partnership or joint venture. And so part of like how we're thinking about this general conference is, if we use the language of koinonia, it's an invitation for us to be partners with God in how we are using and allocating the resources of God's people, right? That this koinonia is it's a partnership. It's an engagement. We're going back and forth. We see that brother James Blackman has 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 said it's a good conversation. We can show that comment in there. Thanks for being here. Um, we are thinking through our partnership with the divine, with God, as we're doing this general conference work. And I think that's important to keep at the fore. And also, I think that, as you were saying, we want to give things back to these local churches. I think what's important is to think about that they have been faithful partners Even when they might could look and say the general church hadn't been a faithful partner toward them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's so if for no other reason, now is the time. I asked the questions about stakes, what's at stake. I think uh oh, the viability. I'm gonna take what you said. I'm gonna extend it just a little bit more. What's at stake is certainly the viability of the local church, and by extension, the viability of the CME church.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if I think that's something we really have to deeply internalize here in this meeting, that if our local churches fail, if our local churches fall, if our local churches are too weak, to the point where they can't function, then that impacts the ability of the entire denomination to function.
You know,
And so when we say that the local church is at stake, we are also saying the denomination is at stake.
you and I have had a conversation about this before, and I think it's good for the audience tuning in now about some of the differences in our upbringing experiences with the church. You as a
Mhm.
CME PK, and me kind of as a part of strong lay leadership in a congregation that was very close to our primitive Baptist uh, colleagues with a more congregational style of polity, where the local church leadership and what's happening at the local church is much more central to the work of the congregation. Shout out Akron CME Church in Berkeley was much more central to what we did and how we understood our identity as a body of believers, if you will, than kind of the CME identity component. CME was important. Don't get me wrong. We knew that's how we got the preacher. We knew that's how we had to pay the assessments. We knew that the CYY, like those things were a part, but also right the real life, the quotidian or the day to day part of being a member of this church was not necessarily about being CME proper, but about being good Christians and about being a good member of this local church. And even as a CME pastor who has had opportunity to travel across the denomination and because of the connection, been able to lead and to see different types of congregations that are a little bit more CME leaning in their identity. It's important to remember that even at our churches that are very much trapped in or caught up or defined um, by that part of their identity, that it's the local congregation that makes that identity alive for people. It's that local congregation that is what is actually the heart, the essence, the core of who we are and what we're doing. And whenever we lose that, whenever we see the people who we are serving, the people who we are partnering with as substitutable and disposable, then we
Mhm.
wind up um, with an organization that's lost the plot, as the young people say.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Like we
yeah,
are a connection of churches.
yeah.
The church is a connection, and and so getting caught up on how the connectional or general organization is functioning without recognizing that it only exists at the service and the pleasure of the smaller is probably it's reorienting in some ways, and some will probably disagree. I think that some might make a different ecclesiological concern. Ecclesiology being the
Yeah.
study of structure and hierarchy. Um, yeah, I think in that way I'm very much American. and yeah,
We've got a comment from Juana Adams. Hey, doctors, what
Reverend
do you
Juana
think?
Adams.
Excuse me. And if I'm not mistaken, she is a member of the Seventh.
Yes.
Hey, doctor, what do you think needs to change systemically within the CME Church so we don't die as a denomination. Systemically is where I'm resting. Um, I think a lot of what we've been offering, or what we've been trying to offer in this mini series, is an answer to that. That we think the focus, or the lack of focus on local churches, needs to change. Right. I want to I want to first begin with that as an answer. Um, we need to take advantage of our system, which lends to local churches, which lends power to representatives from local churches. And so I think one thing we need to be very serious about is what we've been saying, to collectively use a local church as a hermeneutic, operate in the best interests of a local church, or privilege the local church more, and the interests of the local church more. I have another thought, but I'm going to let my colleague answer as well. He might say what I want to say. But go ahead. Go
Well,
ahead.
I don't know because I think that like I'm I'm a little torn in thinking about how to answer this because I know Reverend Adams and where she's coming from, that I think that there's two different types of answers I would give. That like I think that one of the things that the denomination has to really think about is for like the churches where she comes out of, how do we make sure that we are supporting and strengthening our larger churches that are vibrant, that we are not extracting more from them so that they can be kind of like supportive and helpful for the churches in their area. How do we make sure that the denomination is not standing in the way of our congregations that are actually thriving? And that's something that has to be that we really have to think about as we are considering um, how are we honestly taking into account the number of vibrant, like healthy, larger congregations that we have, and what are we doing in our powers, whether it's just one bishop's appointment or the college or our churches coming together to think about how do we make sure that we hold on to and strengthen those congregations, because as a denomination we can't really afford to lose any of those stronger congregations. So I think that that's one answer. Like we really should make a priority of how do we make sure that those strong congregations are protected against from some of the problems of the system, so they get a special opportunity to thrive. And this is not necessarily saying that they should get some special privilege just because they're larger, but if we think about the viability of the denomination, then we really have to make sure that we are putting resources in those places. But then what we have to do for our other congregations, our smaller ones, which are the majority of what we have to make sure that we are not taxing them out of existence.
Right.
that that they can see how they can get resources from the larger churches, and that they can actually benefit from being connected. And one of the challenges, and why we keep kind of pushing this kind of financial side, is that if the only time we are connected is so that we can assist each other in raising funds that go to the central church or the larger denomination, then we've kind of again lost the plot. We have to wonder if we're actually being partners with God in faithful ways. And so we could lean into each other, but we have to lean into each other more than just figuring out ways to push our resources up, but the way that we can share our resources in our community. Because one thing I think is really a part of this is that something that my grandma Mima says is that the church won't die while Jesus lives, right? And I think that God's church, right, the ecclesia, it won't die while Jesus lives. And I think that like here I'm about to sound real preacherly and pastoral, and maybe it's because Reverend Adams asked the question. I'm gonna get into my old evangelistic hat, but if we go to where Jesus is, right, then I think we can expect to get more success. And where is Jesus, right? Taking the Black liberation theology perspective that Jesus and God is on the side of the oppressed, then if we are going to where people are and we are not being oppressors, but we're out trying to lift up our people and to try to provide opportunities and resources and healthcare to folks, then we are going to be able to witness not dying. We're going to witness the life that I believe that there will be something that is supernatural that happens because we are actually meeting people's needs and going where God and Jesus are. And a lot of times that's not what we have understood our mission is as a part of this organization, this denomination. And we have to think about it that way. That's why I talk about part of our work as a denomination be about the flourishing of Black life. That's like we can call it soul saving or what have you, but everything we should be doing should be helping to make our folks live more meaningful lives in a world and a country that's already tearing it down. So when that's not what we're about, I think that really helps to hasten the death. And so systematically, there's some work that we need to do around making sure that we're keeping the main thing, and that we are not extracting more resources from people, and that those places that are thriving, that the denomination doesn't get in their way. Whether it's if we have to think about itineracy in different ways for those congregations, that's part of the work that we need to do. So that's my kind of hot take, and maybe that gave you some time to come back around. We have another question, but yeah,
Yeah,
feel free
I
to
just want to,
expand
I
on
want
anything either. But go ahead.
I want to respond. I want to respond to uh, a few things that I'm gonna try to be concise here, but there's tension. There's tension, and you may remember Dr. Williams maybe a couple episodes ago. I said, well, I think I have a suggestion for scripture for us to read, and it was, "What does it profit a man?" No, 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 no. If you seek to save your life,
Yeah.
you will lose it. It was that. If you if you seek to save your life, you'll lose it. He who seeks to lose his life for the sake of Christ will surely gain it. And while I get that Reverend Adams is asking a systemic question, I think I want to I want to lean in with you to the sort of spiritual, um, what I hear as a spiritual ebb here for us, that as a church denominationally, we have to be willing to intentionally risk our denomination, our institutional life, and our institutional comforts for the sake of those things that God has called us to care about, the least of these, the poor, because the Bible says, because, I'm a preacher now, so I can throw that around every now and again, because the Bible says, because Scripture is very clear, and I think this, in a very serious way, I think this is a serious spiritual imperative for us. What does it look like for the denomination to be sacrificial for the sake of something other than its own survival? Or for the sake of something other than furthering the status quo, or for the sake of protecting something other than the way things are right now. And so I think that is also at the heart of us, of the change that we need to make in order not to die according to Scripture. But go ahead.
Now, I want you to stick here, and I want to lean into something you said at the beginning of these comments around how we have to risk our institutional life. I think that that's a beautiful phrasing. And you taught me something a couple months ago about how the church in the 20th century, like I believe it was kingdom expansion, that like part of the general budget, part of like why there are churches in the West is because part of the vision of the denomination's life was risked on the Great Migration, and
Mhm.
so you know this better than I do. So I got my Bible moment in. You can get your church moment in.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was, the the exit from the South for Black folks was not. It wasn't in its own way full of many dangerous toils and snares, and a lot of uncertainty. And so, Dennis Dickerson, who was an AME historian, writes about, for example, Black folk coming up from places like North Carolina and South Carolina and Alabama, going to Pittsburgh, where Black folks where certain steel companies and various industrial outfits were hiring up Black folks and inviting Black folks to come and live in the urban areas. And there were several attempts. There were several attempts at starting a CME church in Pittsburgh that failed before they finally got one. And people were discouraged. You can go back and read annual conference minutes where Bishop Carter, who was leading the effort at the time, Randall Carter, at the time, was trying to tell people, keep on investing. We have to keep at this if we want to flourish, if we want to be present in this new space. We are going to have to give of ourselves continuously and sacrifice to make this happen. Now, that I think the other way that example shows risk is so much of what the CME Church knew itself up until that point was as a Southern church. This is a Southern church. This is where we are. We're in the South. We're in Mississippi and Alabama, and that's where that was sort of the identity of the church. And so people not only grappled with the physical moving and those sort of very tangible material risks, but there was the church sort of entered a kind of in the Great Migration, and we appreciate that. Many churches were established, and many of the churches that we love, and I come from the churches that were established during this period in Chicago, and I pastor a church in Philadelphia. That's also part of this story. But these churches exist now because our ancestors said we can't just be a Southern church, because our ancestors said we have to push our way into this new territory. There is work to be done here, kingdom work to be done here, and investments were made, sacrifices were made, etc. And so it would be great. It would be great if we had another moment like that, where we push our way into a new space and challenge ourselves to know ourselves differently, to have a different kind of identity. Yeah, yeah. Thank you for bringing that. Thank you for bringing that up. Thank you for bringing
Yeah,
that up.
and
Uh,
I think this in the same way. I think we can bring in Brother Blackman's. Um,
okay, yes, sure. I'm sorry, I forgot about that. Yes, yes.
oh no, um, he writes, "Do you think we have lost our sense of connection? A connection works both ways, and for what I'm hearing from you is that we've turned this into a one-way relationship." And I can take my first stab at this and say that I think what is in I want to say incontrovertible. You can't. It's not really changing, and it's really unquestionable, uncontestable that that financially it's a one way for a large percentage of most of the organization. It definitely is. But I do think that we understand ourselves as offering some in-kind services, right? like the appointment of the pastor, like the legitimation of clergy credentials and those kind of things. But I wonder though, and why I think this is such a really important question is, especially like in line with the example that you just gave, Dr. Hargrove, is that the connection understood itself as using resources to connect itself with other congregations
Mhm.
rather than just for the sake of the connection in and of itself. So I think that, like in some ways, what is really rich about thinking about this question is somebody recently talked about Howard Thurman discussed that water could be understood in three ways. It could be understood as held in a reservoir, a canal, or a swamp, right?
Mm.
The example should be that if it's in a reservoir, it's only there to be held, to be used, and to go somewhere else. The canal is constantly flowing to move things through it, but a swamp just collects things
Mhm.
and just becomes odorous because that's where things go to die. And part of what we are thinking through is are the resources and are the way that we are working with this connection, are we a reservoir or have we become a swamp? I think some might argue we're a canal because the money just keeps sliding right out of the hands, moving.
That's actually the thought I had, but
but
yeah, yeah,
but the
yeah.
connection should be, how do we connect from what's happening at the top so it's coming down. One thing we will say, like with the PDO office, that I think people are impressed because that has been one place where people have actually seen PDO, the the development office. um, it has sent resources to people. Churches and individuals have received funds, so it's coming down in that way. But like more broadly, I wonder how many people are actually reading CME literature. Are they seeing it come down to them in that way? The index like doesn't regularly come on time, or people seeing the denomination bring things back to them that way. Like these are things that people are wondering, what am I getting for this large amount? And I think sometimes it's read as transactional, but it's not really
Mhm.
transactional. It's about relationship. It's about covenant. It's about partnership. Um, how are we in relationship with each other? Um, if you want to say some more about that.
We use the word fellowship a lot in this denomination, and that feels instructive here too. That feels instructive here too. But I do want to get to, I don't I want to pay attention to the comments, because we're inviting people to talk. So when this comment came up, you were talking about water, that water analogy. And my thought when this comment came up was, speaking of water, our mutual friend who wrote a song some years ago, Something in the Water, Reverend Dr. Dolly um, how there's another reality where congregations expect to receive financial support from the region, but have no sense of their connectedness in helping and strengthening other congregations. Um, yeah, I think that does. I think that makes sense. Yeah, yeah, I think that does make sense. Um, do we have other thoughts, Dr. Williams, about what is at stake for us in this fellowship, in this connection, um, a la Brother Blackman's question?
Well, putting these together, I think that what is really being brought up, in, especially in this conversation today, are the ways our that our connection is is often only understood as a connection at a high level, and at the high level as it's going up. It's not seen as coming down nor being spread amongst. And and part of what what has to help our reimagining. I mean, part of why we kind of keep talking about local churches is that when we recognize that the base of the strength is the local congregation, then they should be seeing how they are in conversations and with each other, that we should be thinking about our mutual aid and mutual work together. Oh, and so go ahead. I see you flipped the comment. Yeah,
No,
I
no,
was talking about
she's adding. She's a doctor. She's adding. This is also a reflection of those congregations feeling more connected to their neighboring churches than to the CME church. Can I say, because I think there's a theme here, and Dr. Howell is also serving in Alabama. That's how we know her. We know her from the fifth,
yeah.
and I do think there is something, we touched on it earlier. There is something about this slight cultural difference on the ground between how certain, maybe more rural, or maybe churches in the fifth or Alabama or in Mississippi, churches that have that are in proximity with other more congregational minded um, parishes, where I do think there is a difference between how various local churches imagine the connection, or even their even connectedness to the connection. You mentioned this, you touched on this, that you grew up in a part of the CME church where there was a lot of independent thinking, and
Bishop
they
Reddick likes to remind us, even at the district level and the regional level, North Central Alabama had a more individualist streak.
Yeah, I think that's a thing. I think that's a thing, and I think it's important to note, because so that we don't make too many blank. As academics, we are frequently challenged not to make too many generalizations, and so I do think something that Dr. Howell is bringing out here is that it really does sort of matter where you sit, your connectedness to the connection. I pastor a church. I'll give a sort of counterexample. I pastor a church where there are, quite a few of my members are, they offer leadership to the annual conference. They offer leadership to the district. They offer leadership and have offered leadership to the general church. And so there is a much more intimate sense of our connectedness to the capital C connection. Um, and I think uh, that is sometimes in tension with our connectedness with neighboring CME churches, neighboring churches, period, right? Even in our community, our neighborhood, our block, and so I think that's worth lifting up too. That's worth noting as well, that not every CME church, when we say they are connected or part of a connection, not every CME church imagines that connection in the same way. Some people very much imagine that connection um, via the missionary society, right? I would argue that the missionary society has its own particular kind of CME connection, and so yeah, I just think that diversity is worth highlighting. That is all. That's all.
And feel free, friends, to keep dropping in some ideas, questions in the chat. We appreciate this engagement. And again, it's so good to see and hear from Dr. Howell. Um, we really, when we were putting this together, we used a charge to keep an old general audience public version of it, but we were thinking of the version that you wrote, and we said we need to get that on
Hmm.
here. So if we follow what Reverend Adams said and we do more of these shows, we're gonna have to contract you out for your version of a charge to keep. Um, and and part of what I want to piggyback on from the previous statement that you made is that when we're imagining all these different ways that CME churches exist, we need to be um, thoughtful about how their various ways of existing need to be don't need to be shackled by anything we do at the general conference.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, because part of what we are allowing people to do is to be relatively free and to be relatively in a way that they can work and think about their ministry and we don't need to keep putting these shackles and handcuffs on congregations. And we need to think about how, like as you said, what are we offering them? Like, what is the incentive? What and there's a moment in time, and I believe sometimes in some ways it crested a bit as we were coming to our first general conference that we started this conversation with in 2010 when BNC or me had a branding that like people were getting something from BNC or me, and I think some people they would love to see that brand reignited in a way.
yeah, yeah. Bishop Henry Williamson um, did a really good job, and it wasn't a very complex branding strategy. He just kept saying, "I'm proud to be CME," and he had some pins made, and he had some shirts made. Um, and anybody who would come to his church at Carter Temple, he'd say it, and aren't you proud to be CME? Aren't you proud? I'm proud to be, and it sort of grew. It grew in that way, and it was a thing. It was a thing for a minute. It would be great. It would be great for us to, um, in this modern or this contemporary moment, to have something produced at this general conference that we could say we're proud to be CME. We have another question from at GQ_PhD.
Yeah, Dr. Janero Fleming, good Kappa man. Yeah, um, I can take my first stab at this question, and then so that we have some time to go back. I think that what is good about this question, or just for us to think about, is with these generational shifts, what is becoming more and more obvious is that there are a lot of leadership vacuums, which means that there are opportunities for younger people to lead. But one of the other sides of this is that a lot of times younger people are being invited to lead with less resources. And so part of the challenge, and I know you know this, is what does it mean to be pastoring a first church in 2026 versus what it was in 86, right? And so part of what is one of the gifts of our denomination is that there are a lot of opportunities for younger people to rise to some significant leadership if they're willing to do some of the work. Um, and I think that's one way to kind of help to create a more robust review of connectionalism, that in ways that people wouldn't necessarily have opportunities in other traditions, there are ways that and kind of sometimes record time people can become a national figure in our church, which I don't think is insignificant, but I think it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to say, well, we need more younger talent. How do we think about the opportunities that can happen at local and larger levels, and what does it take to attract this type of leadership, which which may or may not be connected to what Dr. Howell is saying here. I saw you looking at it.
Yeah. There are in some areas. I think, I'm sorry, just read it. She says, I think we connectionally or as leaders are not honest about how loose of a connection there is in some areas. Yeah, yeah. A friend of ours, I think, brought this to our attention recently with regard to retired pastors and um, this sense that after pastors retire and get elderly, there's not a lot of that connection is really loose. Um, and I think we can sort of even see this anecdotally. You know, you'll see Reverend Dr. Such and Such at the annual conference until you stop seeing Reverend Dr. Such and Such at the annual conference. And then, you know, you might ask about him. You know, I haven't seen Dr. Such and Such. Anybody heard from him? And we really do sort of lose that connection with people when they stop coming to the meeting. It might not just be about retirement. I do think that's a part of it, but I think that's one area where a colleague of ours, Dr. Williams, is inviting us to think about how loose that connection is, um, and perhaps how dependent that connection is on what you can contribute to the connection. That is to say, that once we no longer see you contributing in particular ways, i.e., coming to the meeting, that connection does loosen. Um, and I think that's real. I think that's a thing. That's a thing in our context.
And I think some congregations feel it on their own level, like as a local church level, that all that's kind of considered from them is whether or not their name will be read and round will be next to the pastor. That's kind of, and then after that, there's a way that the connection doesn't feel super tight. Um, Part of what I think our work at this general conference to do is one thing to try to answer Reverend Adams' earlier question is to do whatever we can to make sure that we are adding to the life
Yeah.
of this church and not making decisions that contribute to its decline. I think that that's one of the most important things that delegates really need to bring with them, that regardless of how strong or how loose this connection is, those who are part of it should see it as an asset and not as a liability.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. In the words of our president, I agree 3,000%.
Oh no, why why you gotta go there? Hey, we,
3,000,000%.
we just been on this live too long because we quote everybody now. But this has been
um,
good.
yeah.
We've been able to, and hopefully, if you haven't, we invite you to go back and look at our other videos up to this point as we are thinking about moving into the general conference. Oh, I see. Ramadhan has a really good question. There have been some trainings from the lay department that have gone out around um, parliamentary procedure and otherwise. Feel free. To reach out to us. You have my information, so I can send you some of those links. But if anybody else wants to know some of the information that's going out, they have links to some procedures. There's a Yap app
Yeah.
that has some tutorials on different aspects of the conference and greetings and then of course campaign literature. Um, but yeah, there have been um, from the later.
But just to add to what you're saying, Dr. Williams, but what I think is what may be underneath Reverend Adams' question is, is there training that one can get in anticipation or potentially to be a delegate? Um, yeah,
Mm.
that's what I'm reading in that question. That
Ah.
if you are interested in being a delegate, how can you best prepare yourself for that work?
Mm.
Which is your answer still, your answer is still
Oh
very
yeah.
helpful. Yeah, there's a lot of there's a lot of parliamentary things. She's saying yes. There are a lot of sort of procedural things that are out now that the CIT and the Labor Department, as Dr. Williams mentioned, but also I think preparation towards being a delegate uh, is at the very least you've got to go to your church conference. Go to your church conference. Go to your local church conference and understand how it works so that you can. I think that is how I got practice as a teenager, as a president of CYF. My dad told me you have to show up to church conference. You have to give a report. You have to tell the people what you did. You have to, I couldn't vote in church conference when I was a teenager because you have to be 18. But that's I do think that's where you get practice at the sort of democratic systems that are embedded into our conference system. Hopefully that is a gesture towards an answer to Reverend Adams' question.
And
In addition to everything you said.
also, what I want to add, I was going. You gave me enough time to fix it up because I was going to just give my raw answer, but also you have to be elected by the annual conference, and so leadership in the annual conference is an important way to kind of learn some of the other mechanisms of how the denomination works at that regional level. So then, kind of, you can take that getting elected at the general conference level. One of the reasons why I'm walking slowly is that sometimes the delegates to the general conference are not um, are not people who just want to be a delegate, but they are there because they can deliver certain allegiances. uh, and so that's where some of the complicatedness and the politic of the church is how to is um being a delegate is a part of helping an Episcopal district's political agenda, and thinking through. And part of why we have been having our conversation at this level is that we've been trying to avoid Episcopal agendas. I'll say, and to help to orient people toward thinking about their local churches, right? And so
You
there's a couple more comments. I know you have something to do in a moment, but I'm down to talk as long as we have some comments coming in.
Yeah, I am too. I do have something to do. I do. I also have a very early flight to Dallas tomorrow, but I think we can continue talking. I do just want to also respond to what you just said. The at the pastors conference this past January, you were giving some remarks in your talk, Dr. Williams, and you said at the end or you issued a challenge to us in the room, and you said that the power is ours, or something to the effect of the general conference is, we're about to go to the general conference and the power belongs to us, or the
Yeah, the
power is
people have the power.
people of power to the people, in that vein. And when you talk about people, some people are on the delegation because of what they can deliver to the Episcopal agenda or to the Episcopal district's agenda. While that is very true, um, it is also really important for us to understand that another part of the system is struggle,
Mm-hmm.
and there are spaces. You grew up in spaces. I have been in spaces where you get on the delegation because people know you're going to represent people's interests. You're going to represent the interests of your local church. Um, yeah, and we can call names of those kinds of people. We can call names of people. You and I were talking earlier. We actually hope to embody in this conference a tradition of people, a cloud of witnesses, if you will, of folks who have gone to General Conference because they have a reputation for speaking for the people. Um, those W. Clyde Joneses, those Velma Lois Joneses, those Bertina Lampkins, those Yvonne Kennedys, those Nellie Kings, those Harold McCoys. We can call the roll. And so while that is true, I again, as Donald Trump would say, 1,000% agree. I want to also lay next to that. There is space in this church for people who are willing to be known as someone who will speak up for people, who will speak truth to power, who don't play, however you want to say it. There is room for those kinds of individuals, and those people make it to the General Conference. There's a history of that. There's a history of those people making it.
And if I could I think, try to wrap all this together, because I think I can, unless another comment comes in. I see a landing strip that.
All right.
And one won't be able to do this type of speaking if they don't practice it in small ways. So what Dr. Howell puts here is that if we were doing this kind of work locally or at the district level, then at the annual conference level, and some of what we hope to inspire, and in spite of people want to be upset about this, is that we actually practice life-giving democracy in these death-dealing authoritarian times. That like this energy that we're hoping that comes to the General Conference also comes to the annual conferences, so that the people realize that the direction of the church is not going to come from on high. It's going to take the people actively participating to help to direct where we are headed, all the way down to the local level. And in some ways, that's how that is the connection, that each level is just a church conference at a bigger level with different kinds of responsibilities. And so starting at the smaller level helps to see it. So I think this is really, really rich. And so, yeah, so we are on our way to Dallas. I'm a little bit closer than you, but I think you're going to get there before I do. And so thank you for the traveling mercies for Dr. Hargrove. I'll take some of those traveling mercies myself. We'll see you in Dallas. Thank you all for joining in. Feel free to share this with others. And we hope to have this up. And we heard the challenge to consider doing this even after the General Conference. And so we hear that. And so we're going to pray on it. but one thing we really wanted to do is we wanted to register our voices and some frameworks as we are headed into General Conference 26, so that when people are writing a story or telling the history, or brother historian, that they'll hear that there was this kind of discourse that was happening, regardless of the outcomes of the decisions. That there were some who were trying to have these big conversations to help think about what it would mean to bring some life into this church in this particular moment. So thank you for joining. Thank you for the blessings. Dr. Hargrove, you can have the last words, and we can end the stream.
I think we should pray. Yeah. Pray. I think that's in order. God, we thank you for the CME Church, your tender plant. Now, God, as we prepare to head into Dallas, we of course ask you for traveling mercies for the hundreds of people who are traveling from across the country, from across the world to Dallas. God, be in those planes, be in those airports, be in those cars, be on those buses, be on those trains. God, guide those who are traveling safely. And then, God, when we get there, we know that you are already there. God, we ask that we will be able to connect ourselves to you, that we will be able to plug in to your spirit, to be on one accord as they were in the season of Pentecost, God, that your spirit would move, that we would do things that we did not think we could do, that we would say things that we did not think we could say. God, give us courage, give us wisdom, give us patience and insight. God, help us to be the church that you've called us to be. We thank you for each and every individual that's listening to us, that's tuned in. We thank you for the love that so many people have for your church, God. We ask that you would honor it and grow it and multiply it in the name of Jesus. Because we believe it's done, we say amen.
Amen. Amen. Amen. Before we end the
And I
stream,
say,
and that's
and I
shade.
say,
I just want to note that we've had a number of viewers on Facebook as well. You see, brother Al and Sister Visha Collins, Pastor Joseph Gordon at that great church, um, Carter Temple that you
absolutely,
kept
absolutely.
referencing. Um, Dr. Darvin Adams, another great member of that great fraternity, Kappa Alpha Psi, Dr. Darvin Adams, and then my spouse's nanny, Miss Eileen Boone, her twin sister, Auntie Erling. So we had some representation all around the country tuning in. Thank you for joining in, and we pray you well. Be well, and for those headed to the general conference, see you soon.
All right. Take care. Be safe.